dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problems. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Glad to be with you. Let's talk about the Supreme Court and what they did recently to the Democrats, specifically in Texas, but also by implication across the nation, in pimp-slapping their drive to get voter or congressional district maps redrawn, or to have a finding stand that those districts had been gerrymandered for purposes of racial suppression. You might recall, and let me tell you why this is so bad. It's not so bad that they came up and said, hey, the Democrats made a charge and went up to the courts, and the court said, nah, you don't have anything. Actually, back in March of 2017, you had this occur.
Federal judges found more problems in Texas's voting rights laws, ruling that Republicans racially gerrymandered some congressional districts to weaken the growing electoral power of minorities. The ruling late Friday by a 3-judge panel in San Antonio gave Democrats hope of new, more favorably drawn maps that could turn over more seats in Congress in 2018. But the judges, in their 2-1 decision, didn't propose an immediate fix, and Texas could appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. The GOP-controlled Texas legislature approved the maps in 2011. The same year, a voter ID law that ranks among the toughest in the U.S. was also approved. The Obama administration had brought the muscle of the U.S. Justice Department into Texas to help challenge both the maps and voter ID law. But barely a month after Donald Trump took office, the federal government reversed course and announced it would no longer argue that Texas purposefully discriminated against minorities with its voter ID law. It was not yet clear whether the Trump administration will also drop opposition to Texas's maps.
Consequences follow elections, do they not? Donald Trump won, and all of a sudden, federal opposition to what Texas had done with respect to its congressional maps was dropped. Well, but nevertheless, the panel did hold that there was some racial motivation, for lack of a better term, behind the drawing of certain congressional districts, and put those aside. Now that's interesting, because a few months later, in August, that was already, let's just say it this way, the tide was already starting to turn against Democrats more than just having the Trump administration no longer take the position that the Obama administration had against Texas.
Washington, Reuters. An ideologically divided U.S. Supreme Court on Tuesday handed a win to Republicans in Texas by putting on hold rulings that said electoral districts drawn by state lawmakers discriminated against minority voters. On a 5-4 vote, with the court's conservatives in the majority and the liberal justices dissenting, the court in a brief order blocked two different lower court decisions that found fault with both congressional districts and state legislative districts drawn by the Republican-controlled state legislature. In August, a federal court in Texas struck down two Republican-drawn congressional districts, saying they were discriminatory and ordering new maps to be drawn ahead of elections in 2018. The court said the 27th and 35th congressional districts were drawn in violation of the U.S. Voting Rights Act. Texas has 36 districts, with Republicans holding 25 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives and Democrats 11. The August decision and a similar ruling on the state legislative districts will both remain on hold, meaning no new districts will be drawn in the interim while the High Court considers Texas' appeal in the cases. Voting rights advocates say the Republican lawmakers drew up the districts to undermine the influence of racial minority voters, who typically show more support for Democrats than Republicans.
What really matters out of that ruling is that the redrawing of congressional districts that opponents of that redraw say were racially motivated, well, we're going to put that on hold. We're not going to redraw those right now. So we were back in March of 2017 celebrating, but knowing that Donald Trump wasn't necessarily on board, or the Justice Department under Donald Trump was not necessarily on board. And we knew that the redistricting laws that had been enacted in Texas were now being assailed because they were not racially friendly and were trying to dilute the power of minorities, or so was alleged. And there was, just a whole lot of celebration on the Democrat side. They thought those districts are going to get redrawn. Hold your horses, they said in August of last year. Not so fast. Because we believe Texas is going to appeal this. And Texas did. On the one of the closing days of the current Supreme Court session, the one that just ended, you got this report, and this would happen to come from Fox News, regarding that case along with some others.
Some major rulings tonight to tell you about at the U.S. Supreme Court. Let's get right to my colleague and anchor of Fox News at Night, Shannon Bream. Good evening, Shannon. First up, we've got the court essentially taking on the districts in Texas. So the question is, the congressional districts, how does this potentially affect the midterms?
Yeah, it's interesting because there were a couple of congressional districts in play here, and also some state house seats also there in Texas. And what they did, for the most part, this is going to be viewed as a win for the Republicans today based on what the court decided. In a 5-4 ruling, they said these districts that have been the subject of a fight since way back in 2011, well, they're now going to leave most of them alone. Only one of them they actually held had a problem. This 5-4 vote, critics had said that these were drawn in a way that gave minority voters less of a voice. So they've got this one district now that the court said was impermissible racial gerrymandering. They're going to send that back down. But for those congressional districts in Texas, the ones that would impact us here on Capitol Hill, they're not going to change.
Supreme Court voted 5-4 in favor of the state with respect to its congressional redistricting. Well, they got them on that state thing. I said, you're not hearing me. They couldn't make the case for the congressional districts that they were gerrymandered to restrict or suppress the influence of minorities. WHIO Ohio, Channel 7, published a report saying, I love how they keep saying it's a divided Supreme Court. They never talk about a divided Supreme Court in the media unless the division goes against them. Otherwise, it would simply be a big Supreme Court win. But a divided Supreme Court kept Texas voting maps largely intact, dealing an election year blow to Democrats by reversing earlier. Let's get that. The courts, particularly that three-judge panel in San Antonio, had ruled that there was intentional racial discrimination. Supreme Court said, nonsense. Well, it was only 5-4. Doesn't matter. 5-4 is the same as 9-0. The decision is the decision. This comes months after Democrats had celebrated lower court rulings that invalidated parts of those Texas electoral maps and a revised voter ID law. But that voter ID law was restored in April of this year. And Texas Republicans now have another key victory in long-running battles over voter rights in a state with a booming Hispanic population. We won't talk about the reasons why they have a booming Hispanic population, because that touches on immigration, and that's not the topic of this particular segment. But our legislative maps are legal. Democrats lost their redistricting and voter ID claims. So says Texas Governor Greg Abbott, or he tweeted. The decision also dampened Democrats' case that Texas should once again need federal approval before changing voter laws, a requirement that the Supreme Court eliminated in 2013 when it gutted the heart. I love how they say how it's gutting the heart of the Federal Voting Rights Act. Let me help you out. We don't need a Voting Rights Act today. We don't. I'm not saying we never did. The time to put in a Voting Rights Act was probably early in the 20th century, if not toward the end of the 19th, but it would have been impossible to enact such at the end of the 19th century. You could have put one in earlier in the 20th century. You did put one in the latter half of the 20th century. You don't need it anymore. You cannot tell me that a nation that twice elected a minority person as president, who was arguably the worst president in the nation's history, if not since the Second World War, has a racial voting problem. It does not. It simply does not. The biggest thing that we're getting from this, and to me this is huge, the entire case that people want to make against voter ID laws, well, you lost that in Texas. The entire case you made against congressional redistricting being gerrymandered along racial lines, you lost that battle in Texas. You also lost the voter ID battle in Texas. And all that means is that anyone who wants to put in place voter ID laws that the Supreme Court, as it is currently constituted, is likely to uphold, simply needs to follow the Texas example, which isn't that hard to do. So we're seeing the spigot or the faucet on the blue wave. It's dialing way back. It's not even, we're not in wave territory. I don't even know if we're in a steady stream territory. I think we're coming upon the dripping faucet type of arrangement here. That's not to say that in the midterm that the Democrats will not pick up seats. That is, quote unquote, what normally happens and conventional wisdom will say happens. But conventional wisdom would have kept us from having the president that we currently have. So I'm not so sure about conventional wisdom. I'm not so sure that the American people are not extremely pleased with the president that they've chosen, what he's doing, and are not interested in seeing his agenda, which happens to be their agenda, continue without interruption. I, for one, would be ecstatic to see it continue, and I know that there are plenty others who would also say the same. The issue we have right now are Democrats trying to find a message now that the courts are beginning to fail them. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, a federal judge just stopped a game that has been going on in Washington, D.C. since at least May of last year. So it's been going on for more than a year. And probably earlier. She dismissed a federal lawsuit alleging that Donald Trump and Roger Stone had colluded with Russia in the 2016 election. I find that very interesting. Now, I want to be clear that she is not ruling, the judge did not rule particularly on any finding that there was or was not any collusion. As a matter of fact, she wrote that it bears emphasizing that this court's ruling is not based on a finding that there was no collusion between defendants and Russia during the 2016 presidential election. Now, of course, the enemies of Donald Trump say she didn't say it didn't happen. Yeah, but she threw out the lawsuit that asserted that it did. Because this is what she did say. The case had no merit, and the plaintiffs have not brought, nor could they bring, a viable claim to hold defendants liable for election conspiracy. Because she was suing them about, they had campaign meetings, canvassing voters, and other regular business activities of a political campaign. Those do not constitute activities related to the conspiracies that they alleged in the complaint. In other words, if they ran a campaign, according to these individuals associated with the Democrat National Committee, if they ran a campaign at all, they must have colluded with the Russians. That's basically what they're saying. And the judge threw it out. Now, that happened. I'm sorry, this is funny to me. That happened, I believe, July 3rd. It was thrown out. And on July 5th, one of the defendants in that lawsuit, if you will, Roger Stone, spoke at length to Tucker Carlson about the lawsuit and it being thrown out.
Well, a federal judge has just dismissed a lawsuit filed by two Democratic National Committee donors against the Trump campaign. Their suit accused the campaign and its advisors of plotting to hack the DNC and publish internal emails. That lawsuit might be on stronger ground, of course, as the DNC had turned its server over to the FBI to be investigated. It didn't. We still don't know where the server is. The FBI has requested it multiple times. We don't even know if the Mueller investigation has taken a look at that server. Many mysteries at the heart of this. But Roger Stone was one of the targets in that dismissed lawsuit. He also wrote the book Stone's Rules. He joins us tonight. Roger, thanks a lot for coming on. So what was the point of this lawsuit?
This is a tactic known as lawfare, where Ivy League snots in a nonprofit blessed by Barack Obama file frivolous, even defamatory, but expensive lawsuits against you in which they weave together crazy left-wing conspiracy theories, but they present no evidence. Stop me if you've heard this one. Roger Stone worked with the Russians to hack the DNC and gave the material to Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, Donald Trump. Take your choice. It's a fairy tale. They presented no evidence of this fairy tale at court. Now, it is true the lawsuit was ultimately dismissed on jurisdictional grounds, but it proved, if you read the judge's questioning, she laughed at them in terms of a conspiracy. Recognize, Tucker, I was being sued not for defamatory speech or false speech or hate speech, but for constitutionally protected speech when I commented on something WikiLeaks had already published.
So do we know, let's just go back a little bit to the core of the story, which is the server, whose contents did wind up on the internet and in newspapers. But I don't think we have ever seen proof of how that happened. Where is the server in question?
Well, this brings up a second lawsuit. This lawsuit against me was not filed by the DNC, but by some left-wing nonprofit, and they used it for fundraising. The DNC, when they learned that we were going to ask for their server in discovery, which my able attorneys, Smith and Bushell, did immediately in a letter, they went to court and now want to delay their own lawsuit until after the election. This is outrageous because their lawsuit against me, against the Trump campaign, against Jared Kushner, against Julian Assange, against the Russian state, against WikiLeaks, against the Republican National Committee, against Bozo the Clown, I mean, it's a four-show lawsuit, would have opened the doors to see those servers. Now they're not in such a rush to go to discovery. How about that?
Do we know who has possession of those servers right now?
Well, I don't think we do know. I mean, that's a question for the chairman of the Democratic National Committee. Is there bleach involved? That's the real question. Because the myth that the Russians hacked the DNC can only be proved with inspection. We know that there's substantial forensic evidence cited in an excellent story in The Nation magazine that points to, based on download speeds and other computer jargon that I recognize a few experts in, Bill Benny, Ray McGovern, and others, more likely this data was downloaded to a thumb drive, portable drive, and spirited out the back door.
Well, it sure seems that way.
At a minimum.
But we have no idea. As far as I can tell, we called over the DNC today. We don't know where those servers are. We will find out, I hope. Roger Stone, thank you very much.
But hundreds of thousands of dollars for this dismissal, yet I still have to pay for a Senate, a House, and Mr. Mueller's investigation. Thank you, Tucker. Great to be with you.
Best of luck.
What you should take away from that exchange is the term lawfare, where a bunch of well-funded people who happen to be opposed to you politically tie up your time, take your money, and damage your reputation by filing frivolous and defamatory lawsuits. Some of those lawsuits can even be criminal in nature. But that's kind of what you're dealing with now. You're not dealing with people who are being reasonable. The lawsuit that Roger Stone was talking about was filed by two major DNC donors, Roy Cockrum and Eric Schoenberg, and a former DNC staffer, Scott Comer. And they accused Trump and Roger Stone of engaging in a conspiracy with unidentified Russian agents and WikiLeaks. So now we're talking about Julian Assange, to publish hacked emails back in July of 2016. But again, the case was dismissed because it had no merit. Nevertheless, you have to defend, and to defend, you have to pay. And while you're doing that, whatever you were doing to irritate these people, you now have to cease from that to either defend yourself or to assist your lawyers in preparing the defense. If you've ever been involved in any type of a lawsuit that wasn't necessarily small claims, for example, you have some idea of how engulfing legal activity can be. And that's done intentionally. Now, one way we could stop all this, you can bring lawfare to a screeching halt over time, of course, unfortunately, but you can bring lawfare to a screeching halt by enacting something that has been proposed for in U.S. courts for a while, but is definitely opposed by lawyers, and that's called loser pays. So, for example, this was a civil suit, and when the judge threw it out, it would have been incumbent upon the plaintiffs to pay the legal fees of Roger Stone, Donald Trump, and any others against whom they brought this suit that had no merit. It would have been on them. Loser pays means simply that. If you bring this case and you lose, you're paying all the legal fees. If you bring this legal case and you win, then the other side pays the legal fees. Why? Because the idea is those who did wrong should be responsible for the cost of righting the wrong. The fact that we have a no-fault approach to frivolous lawsuits is why they can be weaponized. And in the case of Donald Trump, they have been. Let me give you an example of how they've been weaponized. Paul Manafort, who I recognize is probably still in jail, because he was accused of trying to influence a witness while he was out on bail. Well, back on the 4th of May, a judge had some real issues with how Special Prosecutor Mueller was handling that case. And to me, this is a clear example of lawfare. Everything that Mueller is doing, he has yet to prove anything for which he was commissioned. He's come up with other stuff that really doesn't prove a thing, except that he knows how to spend money and he knows how to intimidate people. But back in May, this was reported by Reuters regarding our good friend Mueller and his actions against Paul Manafort.
Judge in Manafort case says Mueller's aim is to hurt Trump. You believe that?
President Trump declaring himself vindicated by a federal judge in Virginia who took special counsel Robert Mueller to task. On Friday, Judge T.S. Ellis III said that Mueller should not have, quote, unfettered power, and accused him of using criminal cases to pressure Trump's allies to turn against him. Ellis is hearing a case against former Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort, and at a tense hearing in Virginia, questioned whether Mueller exceeded his authority in filing tax and bank fraud charges against Manafort, some of which involved alleged crimes more than a decade old. Manafort also faces federal charges in Washington, D.C. of conspiring to launder money and failing to register as a foreign agent when he lobbied for the pro-Russia Ukrainian government. Judge Ellis said the Virginia indictment appeared to be a way for Mueller to try to get Manafort to provide information about Trump, to get him to, quote, sing. That was music to Trump's ears. He read the judge's comments out at a speech at the National Rifle Association in Dallas.
How does this have anything to do with the campaign, the judge asked? I've been saying that for a long time. It's a witch hunt.
The sharp tone of the judge's comments could spell trouble for Mueller's case against Manafort, and put even greater pressure on Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein to rein in the Russia investigation. Mueller is tasked with investigating alleged Russian interference in the 2016 election and possible collusion with Russia by the Trump campaign. On Friday, Mueller's team pushed back against Judge Ellis's charges, arguing the special counsel's investigative scope covered the activity in the indictment. Manafort has filed a motion to have the case dismissed.
This is what we're talking about, because this witch hunt, which is exactly what it is simply designed to try to hurt Trump. They don't want him to be president. They're looking at all they have. But the Mueller investigation has produced indictments. It hasn't produced one indictment or one guilty plea that has anything to do with Russian collusion. Not even against Flynn and against Manafort. You just read, they're going after him for things that have nothing to do with the election. Papadopoulos, nothing to do with collusion. 13 Russians whom you will never get into a courtroom. Well, that means something happened. You know what? If you ever looked at the U.S. Code, we could find you guilty of something every day of the week. This is nonsense. And it's lawfare. And it's what the Democrats want to keep going with respect to Mueller and this bogus trip down collusion lane that has neither houses nor neighbors for as long as they possibly can. Those who have the protect Mueller mindset, they know what they're doing, because as soon as you shut Mueller down, and that should have happened a while ago, by the way, as soon as you shut Mueller down, you have no checks on the American agenda, which Donald Trump happens to be shepherding at the moment. And that frightens all the progressives in D.C., Democrat and Republican. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM. In Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com. WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 96.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia, FM. That's for WLBB News Talk. Forgive me for that. Well, Obamacare is getting another blow of the axe from the Trump administration. Yahoo News reported, Trump administration deals another potential blow to Obamacare by freezing risk adjustment payments. The Trump administration announced another potential blow to the Affordable Care Act, the freezing of risk adjustment payments that help stabilize insurance pools in the marketplace. More to that later. This is kind of deceptive reporting. The news comes in the wake of a ruling by a U.S. District Court judge in New Mexico, which says the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, also known as CMS, payment program is legally flawed. Did you hear that? They're trying to say what you guys are doing is illegal. What you're doing is against the law. The suit brought forward in New Mexico argued that the current formula potentially favors larger insurance companies. Now the government is pinning its decision to put payments on hold on the fact the litigation has yet to be resolved. Here's what the Trump administration is saying. Since it is questionable whether or not you're doing things legally, we're not going to do anything until the legal question is resolved. We are not going to subsidize large insurance companies when it is questionable whether or not it is legal to do so. Article goes on, the CMS risk adjustment payments, they make these payments to insurers to help encourage them to participate in the marketplace and offset the cost of enrolling more expensive, high-risk people in insurance pools. We're paying you to insure. Wait a minute. We're paying you to write policies for sick people. But isn't that your business model, to give insurance policies to people who may be sick? Isn't that part of your business model? It's not? Then why is the... Budget Director Mick Mulvaney showed up on the Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer recently to discuss this whole thing about the subsidies, because CNN, of course, takes about as liberal a position as you can get. Wolf Blitzer is really not an exception. And here is how Mick Mulvaney explained what was going on.
The criticism you're getting, not just from Democrats, but even Republicans who are telling you, just heard that this comes as a surprise, that this step to remove these subsidies is going to wind up hurting a whole bunch of people who wound up voting for the President of the United States. Their premiums are going to skyrocket as a result of this.
Yeah, I had a chance to watch the presentation of various folks who just spoke there, and it was interesting that they use the same language, subsidies to people, subsidies to folks, etc. That's not what these are, Wolf. This is money, if you follow the money here, which is what we do at the Office of Management Budget. These were checks from the Treasury to some of the largest healthcare insurance companies in the country. That's what this was. This was not a subsidy to you or me or anybody else who's on Obamacare.
All these subsidies are designed to subsidize premiums for individuals.
And those companies are already required by law to keep the premiums at a certain level. What this was essentially a payoff to the insurance companies to support Obamacare in the first place back in 2009, 2010. It's been a terrible policy, and only at the very end of that last segment there that you saw was the comment about how they're unconstitutional. This money was never appropriated. In fact, I was in the House in 2014 when I voted to give Paul Ryan the ability to file a lawsuit on this, because these monies...
But aren't you concerned if you remove these subsidies, a lot of these big insurance companies are going to pull out and not provide any insurance to these individuals? The competition is going to go way, way down. Some people won't be able to get anything.
I welcome the left, the Democrat Party, to the conversation about what it's like to have insurance companies pull out on states.
These are Republicans who are worried about that.
The point of the matter, though, is that it seems like the Democrats were not very concerned about premiums going up when they went up because of Obamacare in the first place. They weren't very concerned about Bexar counties back when we had them. These payments are payments to insurance companies. I cannot believe that Nancy Pelosi was just on your screen there defending bailout payments to large corporations. Typically, the Democrats are against that. So it's sort of like the shoe is on the other foot here. The bottom line is these are bad policy, and the payments are not appropriate.
Once again, they're designed as subsidies to help with the premiums for individuals. The premiums are going to go up if the subsidies go away. But what will the president say to the millions of Americans potentially out there, and you're familiar, a former member of Congress, whose premiums are about to go up as a result of the decision he had the Justice Department take today?
Keep in mind, most of the insurance companies, in fact, I think the only exception is in North Dakota, South Dakota, and Arizona, most of the insurance companies who filed their proposed rates for next year have already assumed that these payments were not being made. So there's not going to be any additional increase over what.
So you don't think premiums will go up for a lot of Americans as a result of this?
Premiums are already going to go up. Premiums are going up every single year under Obamacare. If insurance companies want to try and raise their rates because they're no longer getting a bailout, that's their problem.
Let's cut through all this. These so-called subsidy payments, these were not payments given to individuals who needed to buy insurance so they could make their payments or their premium payments more affordable. This was money given to insurance companies to encourage them to go insure people. They were getting the money whether anybody showed up or not for insurance. That's a subsidy. I know people cry about the oil subsidy. The oil subsidy is not a subsidy. The government is not writing checks to oil companies. They're just simply reducing taxation upon them. What they were doing, what they do with respect to farm subsidies, and what they were doing with respect, and until the president froze this, with respect to health insurance subsidies, is the U.S. Treasury is writing people checks for them to engage in, or in the case of farm subsidies, not even engage in their chosen business model. Health insurance companies make money by charging a premium to provide a service that is going to be used so seldom that the money they take in from premiums will more than cover the costs of claims and that they will have a profit. That business model is so successful that you do not see ugly insurance corporation buildings in any downtown city, in any major American city in this country. They are show places. They are gorgeous because that business model works. There is the idea that the insurance companies would lose money insuring certain people. So what does that mean? Does that mean that their buildings would be a little bit less opulent? Or does it mean they need to come up with a business model that addressed these particular people in the pool? They know exactly how much money these folks are going to call them. They hire actuaries, who figure all this out and know exactly what their exposure is. Of course, they're publicly traded companies, many of them. What you have here is something that was illegal, something that is unconstitutional, that the Trump administration has said, as long as that is the case, until that is resolved, we're not going to continue to do something that is illegal and unconstitutional. And somehow that has been turned into, you're hurting people. I thought we were a nation of laws, not a nation of men. People will get hurt by any law, but the purpose of law is to make sure that people's rights are not infringed. And no, you do not have a right to health insurance. Now, the interesting thing to me is where were the all the critics of Donald Trump back in 2016? New York Times article from August of 2016. If I remember correctly, in August of 2016, the President of the United States was one Barack Hussein Obama, and his supposed successor was Hillary Rodham Clinton. Obamacare options, this is from the New York Times. In many parts of the country, only one insurer will remain. August 19, 2016. So much for choice. In many parts of the country, Obamacare customers will be down to one insurer when they go to sign up for coverage next year on the public exchanges. Where was the outrage? Because when you're down to one insurer, you don't have a lot of leverage regarding what's going to be in your policy. How much is that policy going to cost? And the government's response to illegally and unconstitutionally give money directly to insurance companies, not to people who need insurance, but to insurance companies who definitely don't need it, so that they might write you a policy. Really? Are you starting to figure out what this is all about yet? Donald Trump came out on the 13th of March of 2017. 1/3 of counties have only one insurer on Affordable Care Act exchanges. Isn't that pretty much what the New York Times said before the election? The PolitiFact took a look at his statement and they judged it true. 1/3 of counties have only one insurer. Wow. I thought with Obamacare, if you liked your plan, you could keep your plan. If you liked your doctor, you could keep your doctor. That was a lie. The payments were unconstitutional. The law was simply a way to get rid of private health insurance in this country. And the reason the insurance companies are upset about the payments going away is I wouldn't want anybody taking my free money away from me either. Obamacare was a mistake, is a mistake. Everything being done, or anything being done, to make that puppy go the way of the dodo bird is welcome in my book. And shutting down subsidy payments to health insurance companies, some of the wealthiest companies in the American economy, is an excellent step to get things back on the right track. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of this first hour. San Francisco. For those who do not know, San Francisco has a reputation for being a beautiful city and a big tourist spot. But over the past few years, because none of this happens overnight, this has been building up over years, San Francisco has now developed a very serious problem.
San Francisco is one of the most iconic cities in the country, but recently tourists saying they are shocked by the conditions on the streets. Look at these pictures, citing homelessness and needle use. So what's going on in that liberal area? Former vice chair of the California Republican Party and attorney Harmeet Dillon is outraged with the conditions of her city, and she joins us now with more. Harmeet, thanks for joining us.
Yes, happy to be here, Ainsley.
Wonderful. Well, tell us what is happening. If we were tourists and we went to San Francisco, what would we see on the streets?
Well, recently what you're going to see is a real spike in homelessness on our streets. You're going to see human excrement because these homeless people are going in the streets, even in very fancy neighborhoods. Hypodermic needles everywhere because we give out free needles to drug addicts in the city. And you'll even see people shooting up heroin right there in the middle of the day, in the middle of the tourist districts in San Francisco. So it's not only scary for the tourists, it's actually scary for those of us who live here. We pay the highest rents in the nation. We have the highest property crimes of all 50 American cities. And it's just getting worse. So, you know, liberal politicians in our city and our state have created these conditions here with crime. We have catch and release for criminals in our city, and they think that by giving out needles and coddling and encouraging people to come, that maybe it'll make it better for them, but obviously it's making it worse for everybody.
I read that one of the local TV stations went out and they were surveying all the streets. They walked 153 blocks in downtown San Francisco and then reported on what they found. They found trash littered on every block, 41 blocks dotted with needles, and 96 blocks were sold with piles of feces. It's just disgusting. Why is this happening in San Francisco?
Well, it's happening for a combination of reasons. Number one, I call San Francisco the utopian petri dish of America. We try out every crazy liberal idea there, and then sometimes they spread to other cities, unfortunately.
Like giving out free needles,
in San Francisco. Yes, some of the addicts are getting 18 needles a month. I mean, that's been going on for over 20 years, but it's really spiked. We've had a doubling of the number of homeless people living on the street in the top tourist neighborhoods in our city. And overall in California, we actually have had a spike. So a quarter of the homeless people in America live in California. But we have warm weather, as you showed in your pictures there. It's a very beautiful city, and it's a very, very liberal city. Gavin Newsom is now trying to become the governor, and he was our mayor. And they just give out cash, and they give out benefits to homeless people.
Okay.
And guess what? When you subsidize something, people come and there's more of it.
Yeah, it's enabling people. Thanks so much, Harmeet. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Now, that was one of the rarest of the rare breeds politically, a Republican in the city of San Francisco. And yes, she was speaking to Ainsley Earhart of Fox News. So you're not going to expect that that's going to be a favorable treatment of San Francisco's problem with homelessness and the other issues that correlate with that. However, a local news station, KPIX, filed this report back on the 21st of June, indicating that the situation was serious enough for a warning to be given regarding tourism in the city.
People visiting San Francisco from all over the world are becoming more aware of the homeless problem. KPIX5's John Ramos says the city's tourism industry is worried.
It may sound crazy, but shortly after the 1906 earthquake and fire leveled San Francisco, city leaders decided that tourism was a good way to repair the economy. It worked, and now, more than a century later, visitors contribute more than $700 million a year to keep the city running.
So tourism has long been the key industry in San Francisco.
Welcome to the 108th annual luncheon of the city's largest tourism organization, known as SF Travel. The group includes businesses that cater to tourists, so you may be surprised how candid today's message was.
We've got such a glorious history, such a beautiful setting, and the fact is, we're letting it slip away.
And there is one problem causing that concern.
Tonight, 23,000 people will be homeless in the Bay Area. That's a crisis.
We've lost conventions who are afraid to come to San Francisco because coming here, they saw some of the conditions on the streets. They said, I don't know if this is safe and secure.
Ironically, it may be the superheated economy with its high housing costs that is forcing those on the margins out onto the street. Whatever the reason, homelessness is growing in the Bay Area and is becoming much more visible to the visitors.
My wife noticed a sidewalk full of tents, and she said, you wouldn't be able to build a house on the sidewalk, so why are they tolerating tents on the sidewalk?
The city tolerates it because it doesn't seem to have any choice. There is simply no affordable place to put poor people in the area. But the tourism group believes that compassion is being exploited, and more should be done to deal with the crime, filth, and open drug use in the city.
We can't blame people on the streets because they're there and because of unfortunate situations. We have to help them, but at the same time, we can't tolerate bad behavior on the streets, and that has to stop.
San Francisco's tourism was born of adversity, and it faces adversity today. Luckily, the city holds enough charm to keep visitors coming back in spite of it. In San Francisco, John Ramos, KPIX5.
The $700 million that John just mentioned is just from the taxes generated by tourism. Overall, visitors spend more than $10 billion a year, making tourism the city's largest industry.
Maybe it's just me. If I ran a city where tourism is the largest industry and it contributed $10 billion to the local economy and $700 million directly in taxes, I wouldn't mess that up. I'll give you an example. San Antonio's Riverwalk. San Antonio is definitely not San Francisco. And San Antonio has a lot of crime, a lot of issues. But if you go down to Riverwalk, that place, you can sleep on on Riverwalk, and you would probably not feel that anything's going to happen to you. The city understands where its bread is buttered, and they take care of it. San Francisco does not. And you heard people saying, look, we're letting it slip away. This could cost us money in tourism. And on the 2nd of July, another local TV station, KRON, in San Francisco, had this report in the way of almost an announcement.
Conventions are a big deal for us as a city. If you think about it, people spend more money outside a hotel than inside. So when a convention isn't here, everybody feels it. So our restaurants feel it, our taxis, our attractions. And so for us, we should all be concerned. And the tourism industry and the hotel industry supports the city with a lot of resources. And so if something affects those resources, then it's definitely going to be something that we should be concerned about.
That's Kevin Carroll, Executive Director of the Hotel Council of San Francisco. They represent hotels here and their guests. He's reacting to the news, according to SF Travel, the city's Convention and Visitors Bureau, that a large medical convention that has been coming to San Francisco since the 1980s is now looking for a new host city because of the dirty streets and the homelessness issue.
The issue for our visitors and for our employees is the aggression and safety on our streets. And so for them and for all of us, we want to create an environment. San Francisco is an incredible destination, and we want to make sure that when people are here that they feel safe.
SF Travel does not want to name the 5-day trade show that draws 15,000 attendees and pumps about $40 million into the local economy because they are hoping to lure them back in the future. The convention told SF Travel, quote, that they love the city, but post-convention surveys revealed their members were afraid to walk the streets amid the open drug use, threatening behavior, and mental illness that are common on the streets, end quote. San Francisco's biggest industry is tourism. It brings in $9 billion a year. Conventions represent about $1.7 billion of the industry.
I think everybody agrees that there's a problem. We don't think it's right what's happening on our streets, and I think what we're looking for now is to make sure that that turns into solutions that we can really notice on the street.
In San Francisco, Gabe Slate, Cron 4 News.
There you have it. So it's not just Fox News saying it, it's local television saying it, and it's actually a convention that had been coming there for decades that finally said, we're not coming anymore. And this was a medical convention that was run out of or organized out of Chicago, which has its own homeless problem. But the problem in San Francisco is so bad that they're not going there. Here is my question. Where is Nancy Pelosi? Because this is her district. And if she has nothing to say about what's going on in her district, and she's allowing it to go literally to crap, it is a fecal void. The same word that Dick Durbin used to describe countries and foreign countries and assign that to President Trump. That's what San Francisco has now become. 20 pounds and more of human dung being left on the street. People taking a dump in the street. This is how she runs her district. Do you really want Democrats in control of the House and her with the speaker's gavel? What is she going to do to the country if it's okay for her city to be overrun with drug addicts and street people and human feces and needles? What do you think she has in mind for the country? And with that, I'll turn this over to my good friend Ron Edwards, and after that, we'll be back with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinking.
This is Diamond and Silk, and we never miss a page from the Edwards Notebook.
Beijing accused the United States of opening fire on the world. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, for decades, the United States has literally been abused and taken advantage of. When it comes to trade, many nations have all slapped massive tariffs ranging from 10 to 25% against various U.S. products, while enjoying very low tariffs averaging 2.5% when sending their goods to America. Let's not forget that China has been allowed to run the okey-doke on America and steal the intellectual property of innovative U.S. companies and use that to compete against our corporations. So along came President Trump, who sought to level the playing field and proposed that all nations drop tariffs and openly and fairly compete in a true free market environment. China and other nations are responding with more tariffs and complaints because they would rather screw over the United States than compete fairly and prosper in a free trade situation. President Trump, I thank you for seeing the big picture and standing up for America while fighting for true free trade that would benefit all nations. And don't miss the Ron Edwards Experience, Fridays at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on AmericaMatters.us, SHR Media, and Sunday midnights on Talk America Radio. I'm Ron Edwards.
Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin'.
freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problems. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinkin here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk Radio, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, let's talk about our good friend, or not so good friend, abortion. Specifically, Roe versus Wade is in more trouble than you may think. And it's not just because of the the retirement of Anthony Kennedy, opening up another opportunity for Donald Trump to appoint a Supreme Court justice. Not to mention, I have no idea what is keeping Ruth Bader Ginsburg alive, whether or not it's a legal substance or anything like that. So she's likely to not last 2 Trump terms, and I do think at this point he is likely to be reelected. I don't think she's going to last that long without being on life support at some point in time. So he could have the opportunity to put 3 people on the court. If Neil Gorsuch is any example of what he's going to do, then if he gets 2 more picks, then Roe v. Wade, as a decision that enables abortion, which it never really did, by the way, is very much in jeopardy. And I want to give you a feeling why Roe v. Wade is in as much trouble as it is now, more than I would argue at any time since the Supreme Court decision in 1973. Let's go back and talk about the woman who was at the center of that court case back in 1973. She passed away in 2017. And her position on abortion, as the woman around all this, around whom all this went about, was not what people might have thought it would be.
And Kelly, we're also being told that the woman at the center of the landmark Roe versus Wade ruling, Norma McCorvey, has died. A journalist who was writing a book about the case confirming that she died of heart failure this morning at an assisted living facility in her home state of Texas. McCorvey, known as Jane Roe in the ruling, became an activist for reproductive rights after filing a lawsuit that led to the 1973 decision. The ruling established abortion as a constitutional right. She later reversed her position and lent her support to pro-life causes. Norma McCorvey, a main figure in one of America's most contentious legal cases, was 69 years old.
That was from February of 2017. So the woman who went into court in a case that wound its way all the way up to the Supreme Court and came back with a very interesting decision that is now, the left is calling it a constitutional right. I do not think you have a constitutional right to kill anyone without due process of law, that person receiving due process of law, the person that you're going to kill. I don't think it's constitutional. I don't think it's constitutional at the federal level. I don't think it's constitutional at the state level. But guess what? We do it. And we have killed 60 million or more children in the 45 years now since Roe v. Wade, that decision was rendered. Here's something interesting to me. Back in July of 2012, prior to the re-election of Barack Obama, Justice Antonin Scalia, still alive at the time, appeared on CNN with Piers Morgan, and he was asked a question regarding Roe v. Wade, and he gave his thoughts not on abortion itself, but just on the ruling.
Let's turn to Roe v. Wade, because you, Justice Scalia, you had very strong opinions about this at the time. I know you do now. Why were you so violently opposed to it?
I wouldn't say violently. I'm a peaceful man. You mean adamantly opposed? Adamantly. Basically because the theory that was expounded to impose that decision was a theory that does not make any sense, and that is, namely, the theory of substantive due process. There's a due process clause in the Constitution which says that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. That is obviously a guarantee, not of life, not of liberty, not of property. You can be deprived of all of them, but not without due process. My court, in recent years, has invented what is called substantive due process by simply saying some liberties are so important that no process would suffice to take them away. And that was the theory used in Roe versus Wade, and it's a theory that is simply a lie. The world is divided into substance and procedure.
So should abortion be illegal in your eyes?
Should it be illegal? Yeah. I don't have public views on what should be illegal and what shouldn't. I have public views on what the Constitution prohibits and what it doesn't prohibit.
I mean, the Constitution, when they framed it, they didn't even allow women to have the right to vote. I mean, they gave women no rights.
Oh, come on. No rights?
Did they?
Of course. They were entitled to due process of law.
All kinds of rights.
Couldn't send them to prison without the same kind of a trial that a man would get.
Right, but again, it comes back to changing times. The Founding Fathers were never going to have any reason at that time to consider a woman's right to keep a baby or to have an abortion. It wouldn't have even entered their minds, would it?
I don't know why. Why wouldn't it?
Because at the time it was...
They didn't have wives and daughters that they cared about?
They did, but it was not an issue that they would ever consider framing in a constitution.
I don't
But when
know.
women began to take charge in the last century of their lives and their rights and so on, and began to fight for these, everybody believed that was the right thing to do, didn't they? I mean, why would you be instinctively against that?
My view is, regardless of whether you think prohibiting abortion is good or whether you think prohibiting abortion is bad, regardless of how you come out on that, my only point is the Constitution does not say anything about it. It leaves it up to democratic choice. Some states prohibited it, some states didn't. What Roe versus Wade said was that no state can prohibit it. That is simply not in the Constitution. It was one of those many things, most things in the world, left to democratic choice.
Let me go ahead and say this, and people can get upset. If you really want to understand why Antonin Scalia was not alive throughout the second term of Barack Obama's presidency, I think you just heard why. His private position, he said he had no public position with respect to whether or not abortion should be legal or not, which is appropriate for a Supreme Court justice. His position was only on how the decision was rendered, and he considered it flawed. Substantive due process, which of course was, let's face it, let's break it all down. Just like slavery, abortion never appears in the Constitution, being something that the Constitution either favors or disfavors, supports or condemns. And abortion's not there at all. The idea that women had no rights before the 20th century is ridiculous, that they had no rights in the Constitution. Male or female did not really matter to the Constitution. We have the lie that, well, women didn't vote before Susan B. Anthony and her movement. That's not true. Women didn't own property. That's not true. And if you think there were no abortions prior to 1973 in the United States of America, then you're smoking something. And I know weed is becoming legal in more and more states, so maybe you've been having more than your daily ration of that. None of that is true, and Antonin Scalia was doing his best to politely correct Piers Morgan, who at the time was just over-the-top liberal. He seems to have moderated himself somewhat in recent years. Nevertheless, those views that Scalia stated, indicating that the foundation for the decision that was rendered with respect to Roe v. Wade meant he didn't have any vested interest in considering it settled law because it's not in the Constitution. And Roe v. Wade did not put it in the Constitution despite the protests and affirmations of liberals and progressives. It ain't there because it ain't there. Interesting to me, President-elect Trump, this is something that Business Insider put together back in November of 2016 after the election, showing up in certain places. What you're going to hear is his statement on abortion to Chris Matthews, then during a debate with Hillary Clinton, and finally to 60 Minutes and the female anchor there, what he had to say about abortion when the subject was brought up to him.
Do you believe in punishment for abortion? Yes or no, as a principle?
The answer is that there has to be some form of punishment.
For the woman?
Yeah, there has to be some form.
10 cents, 10 years.
I don't know. That I don't know. That
Why
I don't
not?
know. I don't know.
You take positions and everything else.
Frankly, I do take positions and everything else. It's a very complicated position.
In the 9th month, you can take the baby and rip the baby out of the womb of the mother just prior to the birth of the baby. Now, you can say that that's okay, and Hillary can say that that's okay, but it's not okay with me.
Are you looking to appoint a justice who wants to overturn Roe v. Wade?
Having to do with abortion, if it ever were overturned, it would go back to the states. So it would go back to the states.
Some women won't be able to get an abortion.
No, it'll go back to the states.
By state? No, some.
Yeah, well, they'll perhaps have to go to another state.
And that's okay.
Well, we'll see what happens. It's got a long way to go.
And now you understand why progressives are scared to death of Donald Trump. Here's the one thing that the media is not telling you. Everything that Donald Trump just said is a position that has a significant amount of the electorate backing it. I'm sorry. The idea that people should be able to kill children indiscriminately is not a constitutional right that Americans agree with. We do not believe as Americans that you should be able to indiscriminately kill children that you find inconvenient and that you should have no consequence for it. I know that's the way the law works out right now, but that is not a belief that Americans have. What he talked about regarding pulling a baby out of the womb in the 9th month, he was speaking about partial birth abortion, which is not something progressives object to. It's not something that Hillary Clinton objects to. He objects to it. So do most Americans. They have this problem with the idea that you're going to get all the way to a fully formed child and then have him breached out of the womb, pulled foot first out of the womb so that only the head remains, and then evacuate his head, suck out the brains of the child, and then deliver the rest of the child dead. Americans have a problem with that, and they always have. The third thing is what scares them the most. The idea that the federal government is not making a one-size-fits-all determination on abortion. As Donald Trump said, overturning Roe v. Wade does not end abortion in the United States. They're not going to have less abortions in the state of Washington, where it is the most popular thing going, because Roe v. Wade is overturned. What's going to happen is that those states that don't like abortion are going to be free to regulate abortion as they see fit, and the federal government has nothing to say about it. For example, you might want to know that in the since 1973, there have been 1,193 state abortion restrictions passed. 1/3 of those 1,193, about 400 of them, have been enacted in the last 7 years. Maybe you didn't know that in the state of Arkansas, it is, if you're a woman seeking an abortion in Arkansas, you need to get the man's permission. The man who impregnated you, you need his permission. These things scare the heck out of progressives, because not because it restricts the woman. It's not about the woman. It's about the child. If you really care about the child, then you do not subject the child to summary execution based on a female whim. That's just it. And if you put those type of responsibilities back on women that were removed with a 1973 misreading of a ruling, then the progressive movement would have a very difficult time maintaining its non-traditional footing and its marches toward feminism and the destruction of the American family. But Roe v. Wade's in a lot of trouble, because the states, which is where the people are making their voices most loudly heard, have no problem curtailing abortion. And without the federal government telling them how far they can go, I can tell you right now, some states, it would not occur at all. And you say that's unfair to women? I say, well, you know, pregnancy is not a mandatory situation. They're not outlawing birth. They're not outlawing birth control. They're just saying if you chose not to be responsible, you don't get to correct that situation by killing someone. And be not deceived. Progressivism means that those who disagree with you need to be killed. That's what progressivism means. If you don't believe that, you haven't been paying attention to the reactions of the left to the Donald Trump presidency. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin'. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5, North Florida Talk Radio. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Let's talk a little bit about education and what I want to call Commonwealth education, in hopes that it would be limited there, but I quickly found that it was not. We start with a story out of Pennsylvania that I came across. Pennsylvania school shows students LGBT video but won't share what the students saw with the parents. A local TV station picked up on the story, and they reported it in this way.
Controversy in the East Penn School District is getting some national attention.
Videos involving the LGBT community played at Emmaus High School sparked concern and debate between some parents, students, and national organizations. WFMZ's Julie Rose explains.
Videos played by the Gay Straight Alliance Club during Emmaus High School's morning announcements back in April, now in the spotlight. At a school board meeting earlier this month, several parents, community members, and the president of the American Family Association of Pennsylvania voiced their concerns, saying the entire student body was exposed to homosexual and transgender ideals.
Would the school allow the opposite view to be presented to the students.
Emmaus High School student Aiden Levinson says the idea that the videos forced the gay lifestyle onto heterosexual students couldn't be further from the truth.
It was more of an anti-bullying effort more than anything else.
Levinson is not a member of the LGBTQ community, but spoke at the school board meeting on Monday, expressing his support for showing the videos. He says the short clips gave kids an inside look at some of the adversity LGBTQ students can face.
Kind of insight into what LGBTQ students experience on a day-to-day basis related to discrimination.
But the American Family Association and the Liberty Council, a nonprofit public policy group, say this is also an issue of parental rights.
Parents were not notified that their children were being shown these videos.
The Liberty Council recently sending the school district a letter requesting it provides the links to the, quote, pro-homosexuality YouTube videos, saying parents, quote, have the right to direct the upbringing and associations of minor children. Julia Rose, 69 News.
I personally have a couple of problems with that video. For example, the issue about parental rights and parents actually having a say over what their children are shown in the classroom, which they're paying for, by the way. It seems to get short shrift at the end. And the other is they didn't really show a balanced view from the students. They would have you believe that all the students who saw these videos were cool with it. I don't think that is necessarily the case, but you wouldn't get that from the reporting. Therefore, it is biased. When you read the article that I found, a Pennsylvania school district is under fire for showing students pro-homosexual videos without parental consent and refusing to let parents see the videos for themselves afterward. Did you pick up any of that from the news report? I didn't. In contrast to the outrage, parents and students packed the East Penn School Board meeting to show support for Emmaus High School's decision allowing the Gay-Straight Alliance to show anti-bullying videos. So, not surprisingly, you had the other side showing up to say, we support this. And the anti-bullying videos, like 9 questions gay people have about straight people. I really don't care what questions they have. Show your pride, share your love. Wow. Here is, to me, some interesting quotes here. I do not support a publicly funded school pushing any political or social views on children. That's one of the parents. Said of the purposeful, planned indoctrination videos, which he said made his son feel bullied for being straight. I don't remember hearing that position put forward in the news report. Our community deserves much better than this from the administration and the school board. Parent Michelle Blagbro agreed, citing a section of the state school code that guarantees parents a process for the review of instructional materials and a right to have their children excused from specific instruction that conflicts with their religious beliefs. Here's the response from the superintendent of the schools that is really interesting. Superintendent Michael Schilder responded by claiming that because the videos were part of students' projects rather than staff work, they didn't qualify as curriculum subject to parental review. Seriously? Oh, because your kids do it, you don't get to know about it. He even went so far as to tell WFMZ that this particular work needs to be protected from public scrutiny. So when you decide to pimp for the homosexual agenda, nobody is supposed to know about it. He went on, a parent or member of the public has no right to view or access a student's term paper, speech, or multimedia project just because he or she objects to the topic. Wow. You better really wake up and find out what's going on in your schools, because this is on the verge of just straight outrageous. I wish it stopped there. That was the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, you had this being reported back on the 1st of July.
Virginia's largest school system has approved transgender-friendly language in its sex education curriculum. The Fairfax County School Board made that change last night after hearing from both sides on this controversial issue. Northern Virginia Bureau Chief Peggy Fox explains what changed and why.
The Fairfax County School Board replaced the term biological sex with 4 words: sex assigned at birth, in its human sexuality curriculum. So what do those words mean, sex assigned at birth? Well, it means whatever gender someone else assigned you when you were born. That's not necessarily whatever gender a person identifies with today. So you can see it's very inclusive considering transgender people.
It's 4 important words that say, you value me.
Robert Rigby is the president of FCPS Pride. The organization says it supports a school system in which all people are safe and welcome, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity or expression. He says last night's school board decision was very important.
What does this change mean to a trans kid?
It means someone's using the right language about me. I'm not being dismissed with the phrase biological sex. It means my school includes me. My classmates will include me. Maybe my parents will include me. I count. I'm real. People value me.
Robert Rigby also has been a teacher for about 30 years and currently teaches Latin at West Potomac High School. He knows how hard it is for transgender students to fit in.
You hear people talk at the school board about the suicide rates. When you eliminate the non-acceptance, you eliminate that. It means a great deal to mental health.
Rigby knows not everybody accepts or understands transgender people. He had years of difficulty accepting himself as a gay man.
I grew up very conservatively. I was a member of the reparative ex-gay movement for many, many years.
Really?
I was. And eventually, my attitudes about LGBTQ people changed. If I can change, anyone can change. I have hope for everyone.
Peggy Fox, WUSA 9.
Now, the Fairfax County School Board also changed the dress code, eliminated now sexist words like cleavage, undergarments, and midriff. Now the policy mainly prohibits clothing that exposes an excessive amount of bare skin.
Yeah, this is a thing. So I'm not even sure how to begin with this after that video, except to tell you I looked at a report from WND.com, and they reported weeks ago when board members were considering the move to teach children that there is no such thing as biological sex, and also that clergy are not to be trusted if students have questions. You can't. Do you not understand? Let me help you out. For those of you who are in any way, shape, or form biblical, you need to understand Romans 1:30 makes it clear. Homosexuals hate God. When you're going to basically tell children that you can't trust people who are trying to represent God if you have questions, that is about as clear a demonstration of hatred of God as I can imagine. That's what this whole thing is about. And if you think this has been going on just recently, I hate to tell you this, but because I do this, I go back and look. From cityjournal.org, there is this is an article from 2003. It's called "Queering the Schools." Gay activists with teachers union applause are importing a disturbing agenda into the nation's schools. This was 15 years ago. 15 years ago. Are you understanding this? Second paragraph, only in liberal Massachusetts, they start talking about it there, could a public school endorse such an event for teens, you might think, but you would be wrong. For the last decade or so, remember this is 2003, so they're talking about from 1993 on, largely working beneath public or parental notice. They have been doing this to your children under your nose without your notification, without your consent for the last 25 years. A well-organized movement is sought to revolutionize the curricula and culture of the nation's public schools. Its aim to stamp out hegemonic heterosexuality, the traditional view that heterosexuality is the norm, in favor of a new ethos that does not just tolerate homosexuality, but instead actively endorses experimenting with it. This is how you destroy families, not just in the current generation, but you mess up the idea of what a family even looks like going forward. This is what you're up against. And every time you listen to a teacher who is a unionized teacher talk about how they're underpaid, why don't you ask them about this agenda? What are you doing to protect my children? Since I pay you and you keep wanting more money, what are you doing to protect my child against this agenda that you have? If the answer is nothing, I don't think that conversation should last very long. So this thing that just popped up in Pennsylvania, it didn't just pop up. Or pop up in Virginia, just didn't just pop up. It's in Massachusetts, in California, it's everywhere. And it's been going on for a quarter of a century at least. And as long as you continue to allow teachers' unions to direct how education goes, and as long as you continue to allow state and county governments to confiscate your money and fund schools in such a way that you have little say in how much is taken and for what it is used, you have no hope at stopping this agenda. Well, I don't know what to do. Either vote for the right person or be the right candidate. Or just take your kids out of school altogether and teach them at home. That's always an option, if you care more about your children than you do about your immediate livelihood. You can make adjustments on behalf of your children. You do it for other things. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 FM, North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, the Declaration of Independence is now autopilot hate speech, according to Mark Zuckerberg. This from Reason.com, published on the 3rd of July. Since June 24th, the Liberty County Vindicator of Liberty County, Texas, has been sharing daily excerpts from the Declaration of Independence in the run-up to July 4th. The idea was to encourage historical literacy among the readers of that publication. The first 9 such posts of the project went up without incident, but Part 10 did not appear. Instead, the Vindicator received a notice from Facebook saying that the post goes against our standards on hate speech. The post in question contained paragraphs 27 through 31 of the Declaration of Independence, the grievance section of the document, wherein the put-upon colonists detail the irreconcilable differences they had with King George III. Stinnett says that he cannot be sure which exact grievance ran afoul of Facebook's policy. That's the first problem. Facebook's policy is not published. That's one problem. But he assumes that it's paragraph 31, which excoriates King George for inciting domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages. Now, the post was removed by an automated action, and the Vindicator received a feedback message to Facebook with hopes of reaching a human being who could then exempt the Declaration of Independence from its hate speech restrictions. Do you understand this? You have a policy that is not clear, not detailed at all. You're just supposed to understand whatever it is that Facebook understands about hate speech. It's automated, and you have no recourse. That is the way Facebook operates. But it actually points up a larger problem, because this is the type of let's remember something. If you're going to have free speech, you don't have to have free speech that you like. It's supposed to be free. Wasn't that the whole thing about taking an E? Wasn't that it? You guys don't like free speech. And said nobody stopped you from having free speech. All we're saying is have your free speech on your time. Now, Facebook supposedly being social media, unless you're saying something libelous, untrue, dangerous, I'm not exactly sure how you going onto their free platform is anything other than your time, but I digress. RT.com looked at this, and they had an interesting take, and this demonstrated even greater issues than I thought when they had some of their person on the street interactions.
The Facebook algorithm has been removing content that is deemed to be racist or offensive. Not even the U.S. Declaration of Independence has escaped the crusade against hate speech. Check out this not-so-frequently quoted grievance against the British Empire back in 1776 that was recently removed from the site.
He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions.
No one thought twice about phrases like merciless Indian savages back in 1776, but nowadays it's not exactly considered to be polite vocabulary. However, Facebook sent an apology to the newspaper that posted it and overturned its ban, so perhaps it's now okay.
It's a little bit too abrasive, I feel like, for a public forum.
You can't go out and talk like that to people, but I think you can say your own opinion. That's why we have freedom of speech.
You need to change some languages. Even the message might be the same.
I'm all about freedom of speech, so if it's there and people don't want to read it, they don't have to.
You know where that comes from?
Where?
That's from the Declaration of Independence.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow, amazing.
I feel like we've evolved from a place as far as a society of how we think about each other and our backgrounds from when the Declaration was written. Maybe if it were rewritten in today's language, it'd be a little bit more neutral.
Facebook incident fits a pretty common trend in recent U.S. politics. Americans just aren't sure how to deal with their own history. In 2011, congressional Republicans made a big show of reading the U.S. Constitution aloud. However, they had to remove some key passages that were a little offensive. You know, things like African Americans constituting 3/5 of a human being. Statues of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson are now being desecrated because, let's not forget, they owned slaves. Now, statues of Christopher Columbus, who slaughtered Native Americans, are facing a similar rebuke.
George Washington was a slave owner. I don't care if it's a George Washington statue or a Thomas Jefferson statue or a Robert E. Lee statue. They all need to come down.
Thomas Jefferson had slaves.
And I would repeat that the public should not be paying to uphold somebody who has had that kind of background.
It shows the absurdity of speech codes altogether. This whole idea that words are violence, and that's just a false construct. I think it's always okay to question your history, but what the problem where we get off the rails, as we like to say, is when you try to apply today's standards to yesterday's standards and try to protect people from words. If the words call for violence, direct violence, we ban those. If the words are just offensive, leave it alone. Let free speech reign.
But that's not the problem. The problem is you don't know your history. The problem is you don't recognize that what the colonists were facing in 1776 from the Indians was just what they described. When they had warfare with the Indians simply killed everything and everyone. There was no mercy. And that's how they described him. So what you're having a problem with is accuracy, and trying to say that, we've evolved. That little monotone fool who made that comment, people don't evolve. What happened is the United States won that war. The American people conquered this nation and the Indian tribes thereon. It was not pretty on either side. But what was stated in 1776 was simply accurate. If you don't like it, then you don't like it. And the idea that, we're all together, no. You just can't fast forward to what you want. This is the ignorance that you've allowed to go on in the school system because we don't teach history. None of these people even knew that came out of the Declaration of Independence. They didn't know. And we are accepting Twitter, Facebook, other social media platforms that decide to use automated algorithms that you cannot challenge. How dictatorial can you be? How speech censored can you be than to have the things that come out of your mouth or come into your mind to be arbitrarily censored because someone has a different idea of what words mean than you do, and they think somebody else might be offended. They didn't put it to a vote. They wrote an algorithm. If you see this, you must delete it because we have to protect people. Let me help you out. When you are being protected by third parties, you are already a slave. That's it. You already belong to somebody. They've made it clear, and the only thing we're waiting for is for your acquiescence to the fact. Mark Zuckerberg created a wonderful platform that he has misused, that he has abused, and he has abused a number of people through it. He's an intelligent man. He's not a smart man. He is grotesquely ignorant of what it means to be American. He is grotesquely ignorant of American history and values it so little that he would censor it instead of allowing the people of the United States to know why they exist as a nation. You're going to have to make up your mind what to do about this. I already have personally. But you're going to have to start opposing people for those things they do which are offensive, even if it is their platform. Because it's still my country, whether you have social media or not. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida, Talk Radio Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the show. Well, let me just go ahead and start it this way. A few days ago, the Archbishop of Enugu Ecclesiastical Province, Church of Nigeria, Anglican Communion, the good Dr. Emmanuel Chukwumo, issued a 72-hour ultimatum to the federal government to get Leah Sharibu, an abducted Dapchi schoolgirl, released from the captivity of the dreaded terrorist group Boko Haram. Now, for those who are unaware of this story, I'll give you something with which you might be more familiar. Back in April of 2014, this same group, Boko Haram, which roughly translates to Western education is evil, captured 276 young girls, all of them students. And if you recall, we had a Twitter event with respect to them. You know, bring back our girls. We had Michelle Obama standing with the sad face and everything else, and of course the United States government did nothing because Barack Obama is Christian in name only. He's Islamic. Now the government of Nigeria, their president, had 163 of those girls returned. So that means 113 are still with Boko Haram today. For various reasons. I would argue most of them probably were taken as wives, forcibly taken, apparently. That was 4 years ago. If we're talking about Leah Sharibu, now we have something different going on, because the reason Leah Sharibu is being held is the result of a different event. She was abducted back in February. International Christian Concern put out a little video regarding that situation, and to kind of give you a little bit more of an explanation of the story.
Do you remember back in 2014 when Boko Haram captured a couple hundred Christian girls in Nigeria from the Chibok region? Well, 1 month ago, there was another kidnapping. This time it was 110 girls. Now, 5 of the girls died in captivity, and unfortunately, you don't hear a lot about that. But just a few days ago, on March 21st, all the girls were released except for one. Now, think about this. Why is this case so different? Why were these girls released so quickly? Well, you guessed it. These girls were Muslim. Now, the only girl that was not released was Leah Sharibu. And any guess why Leah wasn't released? Because she's a Christian. And under great pressure, she wouldn't convert to Islam. Now, listen to this quote from her father. Leah told him she would never become a Muslim. Now, I'm very sad, but I'm also very happy because my daughter did not denounce Christ. Nigeria's president, like any good politician, has said that she will not be left behind, but she already has been. Think for a moment what Leah's going through right now. I can tell you from experience that she's going through immense mental, if not also physical torture. And this is all because she wouldn't convert to Islam. Well, let's help the president of Nigeria and the politicians of Nigeria to not forget Leah. Take 2 minutes, call the Nigerian embassy in your country, and urge them to find and release Leah Sharibu. Thank you for standing up for Leah and your sister in Christ. And just remember, let's remind each other, let's keep her in prayer. And let's pray right now. Father, we just want to call out to you. We are thinking of Leah right now. We pray for your spirit to come over her. And above all, Lord, open the prison doors, break the chains. Father, release Leah in the name of Jesus.
Leah Sharibu is Nigerian. She is black. She is Christian. And she actually did something that we don't see much of in this country. And that is a black female taking a stand for God in the face of personal adversity for so doing. As of this moment, I can find nothing to report that she has been returned. And if you know anything about Islam, particularly those who engage in Islamic terrorism, which is what Boko Haram does, then you recognize that her life hangs in the balance every day that she's gone. She's not safe in any way, shape, or form. What I am keenest on was the statement of her father, and it was the right statement. Yes, I am terribly sad that my daughter remains in the hands of those who hate her faith and therefore don't have a lot of fond thoughts toward her. But I am joyful because she did not denounce Christ. I only wish we actually had more black females in this country who had the courage, the resolve, and the perspective of a 15-year-old in Nigeria. If we had people here, or at least more people here, of a black and female persuasion who would not denounce Christ under pressure, then there would not be a 77% illegitimacy rate among blacks in the United States. We would not have 48% of black females walking around in the United States infected with genital herpes. We would not have more than 350,000 black children slaughtered in the womb. We would not have the highest divorce rate among American females in the black community. We would not see the level of criminality, of drug use. We would not see any of that. But black females in this country, unlike what we had in the 1950s and earlier, denounce Christ almost daily, and for reasons that are far short of having their lives threatened. We just don't have much going on in the black community anymore with respect to God. I am among those who, as a father of daughters, would be in excruciating despair over her loss and tormented by the fact that she was being held by people who would abuse her because of her faith. And I would also be more proud than I can imagine that she would hold on to her faith in the face of adversity. At the end of the day, you are what you believe. And if that can be manipulated, then you are no one. I would that every black female in the United States who claims to know Christ would stop denouncing him with their bodies, would stop denouncing him by embracing anything resembling a feminist or leftist ideology. You're killing your people, and it is better that one die that the people might live, which is pretty much the message, or part of the message, of Christianity. Leah Sharibu, and I hope you remember her when you pray, is 15 years old. And when I say pray, I'm not talking about pray that she be returned, although that would be wonderful for her family. You need to pray for her the same prayer that Jesus offered for Simon Peter prior to his betrayal. I pray that your faith fail you not, because black people in this country and the country at large need a durable faith, and by durable means it's willing to stand up to things and be maintained through things. If a 15-year-old Nigerian girl can live amongst Muslims who have taken her captive and not deny God, not deny Christ, I wish we could have more 15-year-old black girls and older females take hold of God and see the revolution that would occur in black America and throughout the rest of the country, because someone thought faith was more important than just living. And that's our show. God bless, and God keep you until next week is my hope. And until then, please take care.
You've been listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.